Hello again, everyone. I would like to welcome our panelists, Ms. Barbara Kelemen, Dr. Priya Joshi, Dr. Peter Mantello, and Dr. Douglas Ponton. Hello, everyone who are watching us through our live stream on YouTube. I would like to remind you that you can ask questions on Slido platform #pandemic, or here in Zoom you can ask your questions by raising hands, and I will try to moderate your questions accordingly. Or you can also ask questions on YouTube in the comments under the video. So we can start, I think. The first panelist is Ms. Barbara Kelemen. She's a former BISLA student. She continued her studies at London School of Economics. Currently, she's a research associate in a security advisory firm in London and works in security risks. Her expertise is in China and Asia, but she is focusing mainly on counterterrorism and history of Islamic terrorism. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Micah, for the introduction, and also thank you for the organizers to giving me the opportunity to speak here today on such an optimistic panel. I hope my presentation is not going to be that bleak, but I will talk about the threat perception within the society as a main driver behind changes on three levels: institutional, individual, and on the societal level. First, I will talk about those changes that we've seen after 9/11 regarding threat of terrorism. I will talk a little bit about some changes that we've already seen relating to COVID-19, and then I will try to conclude on a more positive note and talk about the main difference, which keeps me hopeful. So let me start with terrorism, that in 2001 wasn't a new phenomenon. In fact, the term itself has a long history, already a century, and the threat also wasn't new because Al-Qaeda had been carrying out attacks against international targets well since the 90s. What has changed on 9/11 was the perception that suddenly became global. Suddenly, a lot of states found themselves to be targets of potential terrorism, and this led to a change of foreign policy globally. On institutional level, we've seen a lot of changes, either regarding prosecution or privacy. However, probably one of the best examples is air travel, that today is heavily securitized, and many people don't remember how the air travel even was before. I want to point out the specific, let's say, a difference or restrictions that we currently have on liquid amounts that you take on board. This is specifically related to a plot from 2006 where 12 men were planning to smuggle liquid explosives on board of the airplane and detonate them mid-flight. Thankfully, the spot was prevented, but it led to global restrictions on liquids. So this is a good example of how very specific threat actually led to global change. On an individual level, again, in my paper, I'm referring to integrated group theory, which is a social psychology theory that highlights that once there is a shared threat perception within the society, it can lead to real world negative stereotypes, often related to a group that is associated with this threat. When we think about air travel, I mentioned a lot of stories by passengers that have been wrongfully accused of being potential terrorists and often led to delayed flights or canceled flights. Again, when members are aware of these stereotypes, they start to self-police their behavior in a certain way so they don't get identified as potential terrorists, although they themselves didn't commit any offense, or they don't have a reason to behave in this way. What is maybe more important is also that we have other passengers suddenly policing others. In this regard, I encourage everyone to go on Google and try to search for how to spot a potential terrorist on the airplane. Lastly, I want to point out that all these levels are interconnected, but what we've seen on the societal level, which means the relationship between individual and the society, is a redefinition of a concept of safety and security or danger in the society. So today, people, when they travel, they are much more aware of their surroundings. Terrorism has become something that we almost expect to happen, and we learn how to coexist with a threat. What is a good example of this, let's say, threat permanence in our public consciousness is the actual physical appearance of some of those changes. So when you think about security barriers that today are almost on every Christmas market or large events, but also counterterrorism campaigns. So for example, here in London, you have on the transport sometimes some posters. So we also had a campaign, Run, Hide and Tell, that kind of calls on members of the society to report anything suspicious or how to behave during the terrorist attack. While I'm sure that a lot of these policies have saved lives and they will continue to do so, I think it's important to think about how this influences not only how individuals feel in the society, but how they are perceived by the society as suddenly a potential threat. I also want to highlight that this presentation just tries to be descriptive, and I'm not trying to really be normative or judge these changes. Now, all of this is important when we think about COVID-19 because we've already seen a number of changes on all three levels. Institutionally, it's a good example to look at Wuhan, which was the first epicenter of the pandemic. Today, if you want to access any shops or services, you have to present yourself with QR code that shows that you're healthy. So we actually have a very comprehensive system that covers all spheres of life, but is reliant on a single barcode. Obviously, this opens potential for social or governmental control. And it might be more of a risk in authoritarian states, but in fact, we don't have to go that far. We can just look here in Europe, already discussions over privacy concerns when it comes to some apps that tracks virus or so. And it's actually a good sign that we're having the same kind of discussion about privacy as we did in the wake of 9/11 when a lot of counterterrorism policies were being implemented, because it shows that as a society, we're trying to find limits or payoffs we are willing to pay when it comes to the eternal discussion about freedom versus security. On the individual level, and this is probably the one that concerns me the most, is that we've seen a change in a way that today it doesn't matter whether you actually have the intention to be a threat. It doesn't matter your age or anything else. Everyone becomes a threat, which is a little bit dramatic, but it is true to a certain extent. This was unfortunately or very sadly demonstrated in a case of Beli Mujinga, who was a railway worker here in London. And she was spat on by a man that claimed to have COVID-19, and she fell ill and died. So obviously stories like these are gonna lead to a lot of anxiety among people and increase policing among people again. So we've already seen a lot of altercations. For example, one member of the society telling the other to put on the mask. And often this leads to aggressive encounters. So in some countries, we've seen altercations actually leading to killings as these have escalated to much wider conflict. So this potentially can have another, let's say, more negative impact. Now, all of this makes one wonder how this is gonna show long-term on the relationships between people. And this leads to the last level, which is the individual society. Some people of Asian descent have already experienced a lot of racist attacks just because of potentially being a carrier of the virus. And the same thing happened in China, in Guangzhou province, where the African community had been heavily discriminated against and also evicted from their accommodation. What I would be worried about is that we might potentially end up creating a system where we operate with some kind of second-class citizenships just by virtue of people being potential carriers. This means that the threat actually does not have to be real, but is again perceived. I mean, in itself, the issue is not so problematic, but this is definitely going to be tied to socioeconomic background of various members of the society. So let's say members of lower classes are probably going to have hard time to shield themselves from more risky public spaces. Just think about working from home policy that today it's usually a privilege to be able to work from home. Another thing is that maybe you are not going to have enough money to get some required service. So today, if you want to go travel, some countries are requesting you to have tests, which obviously costs money. So it is going to create or could create a little bit of problematic dynamics. However, as I mentioned, I want to end on a more positive note. So it is important to underline that every threat perception has its legitimate roots that cannot be denied, which means that once the society actually manages to deal with the situation in a responsible manner, which kind of so the exaggerated nature of the threat is exposed, we can end up being in a much better or safer place. The main difference between the two, which makes me hopeful, is that in the case of terrorism, when we're looking at a threat, it comes from an outsider, someone who actually has the intention to attack the society. With COVID-19, you know, the proportionality of the threat is usually higher with people that have very strong relationships with the community, and it is in their interest to mitigate the threat. More importantly, it is in their ability to do so. So in a way, we kind of see the agency of an individual being reclaimed. Now, this can be a double-edged sword, because if you have society ultimately responsible for itself, it can lead to the negative examples of policing that I've already talked about. However, I see that if the institutional processes or procedures that are being created keep in mind this positive outcome that we could be thinking about, we could end up having processes that are actually designed in a way that could generate a new kind of citizens, one that actually thinks about his responsibility towards the whole and can end up creating society safer for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to ask whether there are some questions for Ms. Kelemen here on our Zoom. Because we are a bit ahead of the live stream, I would just like to remind you, all of those who are watching right now, you can ask questions as well through Slido #pandemic. But right now, maybe other fellow panelists or other participants in the Zoom, do you have any questions? Just raise your hand, please. While we are waiting, I would like to take the privilege of the moderator and ask you a question. In your paper, which was really interesting, thank you very much, you mentioned that there are two options of how the societies and countries and people in those countries will react. First one was to close themselves, and the second one is to more open themselves to the other world. And I would just wonder, in the connection you mentioned about the new citizen, to what extent do you think that the responses of the governments and head of states will influence this? Because even now we can see the divide between the world. While in one country they really want to pursue openness and open the market as soon as possible, and in other countries, for example, as in Slovakia, we are more closed. So how do you see this difference in the world, and how it will affect the international relations between those parts of the world?
Yeah, thank you. That's actually a very good question, very interesting. Actually, again, like if we think about 9/11, there is a, you know, and the world afterwards, there is an argument made by Julian Reid that writes a lot about this, about the fact how the states actually reclaimed their sovereignty and, you know, ended up having much more wiggle room to become more closed in a way and kind of step back from the globalization in certain ways. Now, I think this is something that we actually are seeing happening in many countries. So you see countries that are becoming much closer, and this, I'm afraid, is fueling a lot of how to say this, like a lot of nationalistic sentiments in populations. So if we choose to go down that road, that could be really problematic also on the societies, because it's all interconnected. So the society ends up being much more closed. Now you have another line, actually, countries that are arguing for more open society and more globalized society in a way, but society which looks at differences. So, I mean, we see the differences in how the virus affects, let's say, African continent. And these were long-term systematic differences that had been ignored. So there is actually a possibility for this kind of openness or globalization took a different route that we have been taking up till now and become in a way better. And I really hope that this is going to also have effects on the society and how people perceive the connectivity within the world itself.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions, even in Slido. Again, do you have other questions? If not, thank you very much again, Mrs. Kelemen, and I think we can move on to other panelists. So I would like to ask Dr. Peter Mantello and Dr. Douglas Ponton.
Okay, so we have a PowerPoint we want to present. Can we start?
Let me just introduce yourselves. So first, Dr. Peter Mantello is a professor at Ritsumeikan Asian Pacific University. He focuses on intersection between technology, conflict, artificial intelligence, and surveillance. And Dr. Douglas Ponton currently works at the Department of Analysis of Political, Social, and Institutional Process at the University of Catania. He does research in pragmatics, semantics, and discourse analysis. Please, the floor is yours. You can share your screen and presentation.
Okay. We're going to start our presentation, and yeah, here we go. Can you see ours? Let's see now. Okay, so here we go. Okay, our presentation today, we're going to talk about the way in which memes both embrace and subvert official, can you see? Hello?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Our paper is the way in which memes embrace and subvert official narratives and measures which have been designed to combat the current global pandemic. And we argue that memes are very important. While they're humorous, they convey oftentimes very serious themes. And so we see them being important objects of study because they act as both a prophylaxis and a catharsis to social anxieties and fears over the threat of contagion. In terms of prophylactics, we see that they allow individuals to find and share voices in the face of precarity, as well as cement social and cultural bonds that focus on resilience and prevention. Now, as a catharsis, we also see them as providing numerous counter narratives for personal agency in reaction to state-enforced directives to curtail freedoms associated with normal life. Importantly, as you can see from this slide, this notion of prophylaxis and catharsis, we see as being both, it's not a matter of being either or, but as a matter of degree. So a meme might have a bit of one, but more of the other. For example, state official memes, such as the one with Boris Johnson here, is based more on prevention and treatment, whereas more grassroots memes can be focused on social anxieties, but also as a way to subvert official messaging. And so, Douglas, do you want to take it over here, from here?
Okay, thank you, Peter. Yes, so we problematize, I suppose, the notion of war on the virus, this metaphor that's been used by several political figures. In The Guardian on the 10th of March, let me just read for you. The world is at war, so Macron tells France. Donald Trump warns Americans they're under attack from the invisible enemy of a murderous virus. And yesterday, Johnson declared himself head of a wartime government. So if we ask what the point of this metaphor is, we find that probably the most salient feature is the withdrawal of civil liberties that generally is associated with wartime. This has been the most conspicuous response of governments around the world to the pandemic. We've had in Italy, and I'm sure in other countries, we've had no church services, we've had no sport, no outdoor activities at all. And we've had the introduction of new social measures like hand sanitization, social distancing, mask wearing, and so on. And actually, if we look at the social history of the Second World War, we find that the measures that we've been asked to endure or to apply are actually much more draconian than anything which happened in the Second World War, certainly in the UK. And we would suggest that this kind of discourse, this kind of metaphor acts to close down the dialogical space to other alternatives. So, for example, it's been questioned online. We've had controversial videos like Plandemic, which has been suppressed by YouTube and Facebook. We've had Dr. Witkowski, for example, who's come out and said that he's a virologist, a specialist, and he said that herd immunity is actually long-term the only effective way to defeat the virus. And we've seen countries like Belarus and Sweden try a softer approach. But if you go for a heavy virus like not heavy virus, if you go for a heavy metaphor like this idea of war on the virus, you close down that space. So as a linguist, I'm using the idea of proximization as a heuristic to approach these memes. Proximization deals with the idea of bringing closer in temporal and spatial terms something that is distant. An example, well-known example, would be the famous claim back in the early 2000s. I don't remember the year exactly, when it was claimed that Saddam Hussein had the ability to, the capacity to attack Great Britain in 45 minutes. So this was bringing much closer something which was distant, and we think that memes do something similar. I'm also looking at them from a pragmatic perspective. Grice, what's going on below the surface of discourse. Text and images are involved, and we try to explain also why they're funny. So the comic resource of incongruity will be found to be quite important here. In a meme, well, this is Hobbes on juxtaposition. Two powerful but unrelated images are presented to us individually, and we are forced to discover their relation. Juxtaposition seems to promise coherence, and thus impels us to try and construct coherence. And long ago, Schopenhauer theorized that incongruity was fundamental in humor. He says that the cause of laughter in every case is simply the sudden perception of incongruity between a concept and the real objects which have just been thought through it in some relation. And laughter itself is just the expression of this incongruity. So let's have a look at a few of the softer memes. I would say these are not political satire, these are more social satire, socially directed satire. So some kind of catharsis, you would say. Here's a very popular one. As you know, in the United Kingdom, there was panic, not so much at the idea of dying from a virus, but for some reason that one might run out of toilet paper. This was seen as something extremely dangerous and threw many people into crisis. So you would say here that incongruity is construed via the juxtaposition of this well-known iconic image with the mundane objects in the foreground, this shopper's trolley and loaded with toilet paper. And I suppose pragmatically, you would explicate the humorous effect of this text image by imagining a voice which was audible only to the central figure, that the supermarkets have run out of toilet paper. And so this is provoking the anxiety. But also there's the associations of this iconic postmodern picture, which would be usually discussed in terms of existential angst, anxiety, and so on, which is quite appropriate, I think, for our current time. Moving on, we have another image in a different way. The Abbey Road meme from the Beatles. I'm sure you all know these memes. You probably have others which are even funnier or even more appropriate. But this is in its way another iconic image. It's the cover of one of the most celebrated records of one of the most famous groups of the 1960s. And incongruity here comes from the disruption that has been effected. So before they were crossing in single file. Now they're split into two lines. And if you try to account for this, you would go, I suppose, to the idea of social distancing. You'd recognize that this aspect of our time is being gently, I would say, satirized in this image. Finally, from me, working from home, two frames that are normally separate clash here: the domestic sphere and the world of work, the world of manual labor specifically. And this is incongruous because you would not expect to find a cement mixer in a living room. And the title of the meme, Working from Home, just underlines the point, which is that unlike other occupations, softer, like, I don't know, journalist, accountant, teacher even, builders have to leave their homes to do their jobs. And so I think here we have a gentle social critique of the lockdown solution from the perspective of certain categories of worker. In the rest of the paper, I think Peter is going to spell out more specifically the cathartic elements of it in terms of social criticism specifically aimed at the government.
Okay. As we discussed earlier, what we're also looking at is the sort of the way in which the rhetorical strategies of the war on terror, the optics of those shift towards from the war on terror to the war on virus, and how a lot of the memes are critiquing this shift in rhetorical strategies. Interestingly, this war on virus sort of rhetoric was used a lot by both Boris Johnson and Trump. And it's interesting because both of them were late in their sort of response to the pandemic. Trump said, our country is at war with an invisible enemy. We are marshaling our full power of the American nation to vanquish the virus. So here we have the analogy between the invisible enemy of terrorism, but now it's shifted to the invisible enemy of the virus. Also, the Surgeon General of the United States, Jerome Adams, a week later said in a speech, this is going to be our Pearl Harbor moment, our 9/11 moment. And so what's interesting in this is it recalls some of the work by David Noon, who wrote a very interesting paper called Operation Enduring Analogy, which is when George W. Bush, shortly after the aftermath of 9/11, used Pearl Harbor as his sort of defining critique of 9/11. And what Noon says is that by using wartime analogies, it becomes more prescriptive than descriptive and analytical. And by harnessing collective memory, it triggers emotional and subconscious responses that that make it easier for political leaders to garner support for certain initiatives. And of course, when we have to understand the analogies of Pearl Harbor and 9/11, by using these and conflating these to the war on virus or the contagion, what they're saying is that Pearl Harbor was a surprise attack, 9/11 was a surprise attack. They're disowning themselves of responsibility when in fact there was clear and present warning weeks and months ahead of time that there was a virus. But in Trump's flagrant dismissal of it being just like the flu, and also of it being gone by the springtime, he sort of, he was in many ways dismissing the threat. But then what we see happening is we see a complete U-turn in policy. Now, going towards the memes, There's three that I picked out, and I'll go through them quickly because I'm running out of time. The first one is from the, it uses the image from the movie 300. And what's interesting here is its dialogic capacity to connect two various ideas, and one being the final scene in the film, which is based on the Greco-Persian War. And as you can see, King Leonidas's 300 soldiers have been killed. And he says that the text says the virus war has begun, when in fact, the irony of the situation is it's already taken place. And the second one being bring on the bleach, which in, in terms of the actual thing it's talking about is it's talking about, Trump, one of Trump's stream of conscious solutions for the problem. So here we have a critique on the sort of dominant discourse at the time and the lack of preparation by America. The next one is using a very iconic image of perhaps one of the most famous intergenerational characters, which is Tom. And Tom and Jerry has been syndicated around the world. So its intertextual capacity is something that resonates with many different generations. And here what we see is we see the idea of the World War III meme, which has become very popular within the last year because as a response to the growing hawkishness of US foreign policy, most notably towards Iran and Iraq, and of course, North Korea. So this is very interesting because the first two frames sort of say, the idea here is that Trump is Tom. And so, Tom figures out that, or is told that his war is canceled, which means his hawkish responses to North Korea and China. And of course, he looks off stage in the third, which could be construed as being his way in which to make the coronavirus an opportunity. But of course, his preparation, his lack of preparation ends up with him being slapped in the face. And very quickly with the last meme, I'm going to Costco. This was probably one of the most famous memes. And one of the reasons why it probably was so famous was because of its ability to, its deeper dialogical reference, which in many ways, the story is based on the film I Am Legend, which the narrative of that film is about a virus that destroys the world. And in this situation, New York becomes sort of a battlefield between a single person and a lone survivor. So in many ways, this meme really does talk about the notion of precarity, the notion of vulnerability, and especially in America, a public that is sort of seeing the rising death tolls, but at the same time, there's this pay for healthcare system, which does not avail the public to any sort of recourse. So a great deal of vulnerability that is associated with this image.
Run the dog.
Okay, so I think we're over now.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask you to stop sharing the screen and just turn on your video so we can see you.
Well, I think we ran out of time.
Well, we got a minute.
Okay, we had one meme that we wanted to play, but do we have time? It's a video meme. It's a minute long.
Yes. I think we can do it. It's fine.
Okay.
I think you made the right choice.
I was petrified. I didn't get why Mom was suddenly always inside. My daily naps were now cut short and sneaking on your bed was done. There's no more barking at the mailman. What's a dog supposed to do for fun? But now you're home, and it's pretty fun. We played fetch for 7 hours in the backyard in the sun. I get belly rubs and treats. I never have to hold my pee. I don't know what a pandemic is, but it sure is good for me. So let's go. Let's walk out the door. We've already had 4 walks a day, and we'll probably do 3 more. In a time of stress, you can rely on man's best friend. And while I hope the world recovers, I'll be sad when this all ends. On the bright side, the pets will thrive. Every day they that you are here with me is the best day of my life. If you stay, I won't eat all your shoes. I'll even stop the indoor poos. The pets will thrive. The pets will thrive. Hey, hey.
Okay, thank you.
At first
Thank
I
you.
was afraid.
Stop it. I don't want it again.
Okay, yeah. So how do I stop? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So
I think I can do it. Yeah, I can do it for you. And
okay,
Start your video.
there we go.
yes, great. Thank you very much for your presentation and for your paper. Again, it was very much interesting read. So I would like to ask, anyone here in the Zoom call whether they have questions for you. Or on Slido, again, #pandemic. If not, I would like to ask a question. It was very interesting to read about how it is important to laugh in this situation, and how can memes help us in this to turn maybe really like harsh times into something more positive. But I would also wonder to what extent those memes, especially those who are which are criticizing the political views or actions of political actors, can start some kind of a social response of the citizens, maybe more engagement in the politics.
What I think is interesting, and you know, I see a lot of similarities, and I'm really glad that Barbara started, because we a lot of the measures that are taking place, the state of emergency, the state of exception, a lot of the measures that are being put into place are very invisible right now. And so I think it's really important that citizens start to create a dialogue to the extent to which these practices are going to remain. Certainly, I know that for myself, being stranded in Italy, I'm not afforded now to go back to Japan, because even though I'm a permanent resident, because I'm not Japanese, I cannot go back to the country where I work and where I own a house at the present time. Yesterday, when Douglas and I were working on the paper, we were having lunch, and the waitress started asking us who we were, where we lived, what our phone numbers were. And we thought it was a marketing, but then we found out it was for contact tracing. So, you know, civil liberties, we're not sure at the extent at which our civil liberties are going to be further eroded. And so these things become very important. And I think memes are in many ways sort of a way in which society itself can generate conversations on issues such as privacy, conversations on surveillance, conversation on the degree to which the state is able to enforce itself into the private lives of citizens.
Yeah. Can I?
Yeah.
If I've got time. Yeah. No. Laughter, humor, and is you're laughing back in a way. One of the things that we've done for this project is to create a survey, an online survey, which would be very happy if you participated in. You could pass on the link to participants in this. But one of the questions we ask is particularly that. It's how far do you think memes might influence political process? Clearly, what's happening are, you know, the choices and the actions of political leaders like Boris Johnson. I mean, in the case of the Johnson data that we used there, that thing was the next day. It was a Twitter. So it was Johnson came out with his contradictory speech on one day. The next day, there's a whole meme going around the world. And so you must think that maybe this kind of counter discourse, humorous discourse, has some kind of will have some kind of effect but it's very difficult to quantify or to say. But certainly in the terms of our paper, we would see that as a form primarily of catharsis. So thank you for your question, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Do we have other questions here in the Zoom or on Slido? If not, maybe a quick, oh no, we have, okay, so James Griffith.
Hey, oh.
James, you know James.
Okay. Hey. Hi, Peter. So this is a kind of a question both for you and for Barbara, because I was struck by the way that Peter, you and Douglas were talking about how war metaphor closes down dialogical space and triggers emotional responses. And something that Barbara said right at the end of her talk was that every threat perception has legitimate roots. And it struck me in this way that the war metaphor, in whatever ways that might be producing the feeling of a threat in a way that's not legitimate. So I don't know, I was just trying to think of those two comments kind of together.
Well, you know, the difference between the war on virus and the war on terror is that the war on terror is largely speculative and imaginative, whereas the rhetoric whereas the war on virus is a real threat. So I mean, there are quite distinct differences between the two, but both sort of the foundation of them both rest on preemption, the notion of bringing the future into the present. And so, you know, how do you bring something that hasn't happened into the present? And I think here it's about the risk of infection. And I think infection is also this idea that Barbara goes back to, where is the idea of the invisible threat. You don't know who the terrorist is. You can't visually see the terrorist, which is the same thing with infection and asymptomatic carriers. So criminality starts to drift into populations, and so you start to see racial profiling, and you know, Asians are being targeted and stuff like that. So I think that's quite interesting in that perspective.
Yeah, thank you, James. Yeah, there's already been research done on this kind of the use of language. I can't remember the lady's name now, but the researcher has done some work which suggests that instead of a war frame, a different frame, a more positive, a more useful frame might have been the frame of solidarity and respect for one's fellow human beings. This is a different frame, which some politicians have definitely been also using. But in terms of the war on the virus frame, which I think we made quite clear in our brief presentation, it's the consequences of that, and it's the associations of the war metaphor. It's the using that metaphor to possibly to usher in a series of social measures, which we're not sure when they're going to be rolled back. And I suppose that's the point that we're making here, that language is important. And it comes out in both directions, in the direction from the government to the people, and also from the people back, I suppose, to the powers that be.
Yeah, and just, you know, an example of that is, for example, in the UK, the NHS hired the services of Plantier, which is an intelligence agency that works largely with the American government to conduct the contact tracing that they want to do and create the applications. And the problem with that is that once these intelligence companies go into data banks that have people's health in it, you're never really quite sure what happens afterwards. And health data is perhaps one of the most valuable data that exists. And so it becomes problematic because when you have agencies like the National Health System that relies on, you know, private companies to run their sort of health surveillance companies or their health surveillance systems, it becomes problematic because you're never really quite sure where the line is drawn, you know.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask Ms. Kelemen whether she wants to react as well, because I understood that it's a partly question for her as well.
Yeah, sure. I think it's very interesting point, and I think one of the things James is referring to is to what extent that like what I said, that the every threat perception has its legitimate roots, whether that can be somehow not true. I still think that it stands when you, I mean, even if you employ rhetorics, like you probably, in order to create the threat perception, you will have to definitely create the enemy for people or for whoever is supposed to see this as a threat. And I think that if you, yeah, exactly. So if you think about creating a threat about something that people will all agree that it's not a threat, it's not going to work. So I think that what happens with this kind of rhetorics is that you will exaggerate the threat. And I think that's what we've seen with both with COVID and terrorism, that in some cases the threat was really exaggerated by deploying not the best type of rhetorics in this case.
Great, thank you very much for the presentation and the discussion. And now we will proceed to the last panelist. Okay, sorry. Okay. So Priya. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, great. So Dr. Priya Joshi is the Bharatanatyam dancer, I'm sorry for the pronunciation, teacher and choreographer based in Pune, India. Currently, she is assistant professor at Flame University. She's also on the panel of gurus at Lalit Rala Kendra, Pune University and School of Performing Arts at Bharati Vishyaspith Deemit University. I hope it was a bit close, but please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mazda. I would like to thank BISLA. Can you hear me? Yeah. I would like to thank BISLA and the organizing team for organizing this conference and giving us an opportunity to present our paper. I would also like to thank Dance Fraternity for inspiring me to take up this topic during pandemic. I start the screen share now. Indian classical dancers rising to the challenge of the pandemic. The world, I would like to thank Dr. Sairaj Patki, Dr. Poonam Gandhi, Dr. Akshay Dhumi, Saili Kedar, Zuide Shankar, and Shaunak Joshi. The world is struck with coronavirus and the pandemic situation. It's perhaps the first ever situation in the global history where mostly the world is shut down. Threat is created to mankind, irrespective of class, caste, race, or culture. People are compelled to isolation, implying a huge social, financial, physical, and psychological impact on them. Artists are no exception either. Art has recorded the history in many ways, and history has changed the arts in many ways. Dance history has recorded hazards like world wars, epidemic like plague, and disruption caused due to it in the artistic world, particularly dance. It not just influenced the artistic expression, but also changed the direction of the artistic work. It's considered as a twofold situation where arts help to sustain mankind during crisis, and crisis contributes in development growth of art in myriad directions. The role of arts in human life in crisis is questioned many a times, yet it continues to exist in different forms. Artists in the past have played a vital role in helping people to envision a better future. This research focuses on understanding the response of Indian classical dancers to the COVID-19 and studying its effect on Indian classical dancers from the perspective of Rasa theory of Natya Shastra, a Sanskrit text on dramaturgy. It's an important opportunity to study how Indian classical dancers coped with the adverse situation, embracing social media for expression, communication, and creativity during the lockdown in India. The purpose of this research was to examine the response of Indian classical dancers to the pandemic situation, to comprehend how the situation was faced by them, and to check if there was some hope for the future from their responses. Objectives. The objectives were to comprehend thoughts or emotions expressed by dancers through the theory of Natya Shastra, to understand how they pursued dance and related work, to comprehend which different activities were undertaken by Indian classical dancers during the lockdown. Method. The method used was descriptive research with purposive sampling. The research was conducted on the basis of social media posts shared on Facebook by participants during the period of 15th March to 15th May 2020, during the lockdown in India. Participants were dancers, dance teachers, institutes from Indian classical dance styles like Bharatanatyam, Kathak, Odissi, Kuchipudi. 236 posts were observed with the aim to elicit data on the impact of COVID-19 on Indian classical dancers. The data was analyzed by using qualitative approach. Results. The data was analyzed on different parameters, on the basis of different parameters, which is shown in the figure. The results are: thoughts and emotions were 23%, dance videos were 20%, generating awareness, funds generation posts were recorded as 20%, discussion posts were 15%, live streaming of performance or dance festivals was 8%, dance teaching, workshop and riyaz, that is practice, the posts were 7%, initiatives undertaken were 5%, and fitness-related posts were 2% in the total sample that we collected. Discussion and analysis. The response of participants were broadly divided into three categories. 1. Expression of thoughts or emotions, pursuance of dance and related areas, and lastly, different activities undertaken during the pandemic. The first section, that is expression of thoughts or emotions, shows posts in this section were analyzed as per the well-known Rasa theory described in ancient Sanskrit text Natya Shastra. The theory explains sthayi bhava, durable psychological state, and rasa, emotions present and felt by the audience arousing out of bhava. They are love, laughter, despair, anger, heroism, fear, disgust, wonder, and peace. The data revealed denotes dominance of utsaha, that is enthusiasm or energy, and strong presence of hasya, laughter, along with presence of nirveda, that is peace, and vismaya, that is astonishment or wonder. Hence, an inference could be drawn that hope and positivity were present amongst Indian classical dancers in the negative environment of fear, sorrow, and anger, thoughts of retrospection, prayer for safety of human beings, gratitude, and wonder for the invisible virus dominating human beings were expressed as well. The research could not locate rati, that is love, and jugupsa, that is disgust. The second component of our study was pursuance of dance and related work. It is again categorized into three subsections. The first one is performance, live streaming, and online dance festival. This section says dance being performing arts primarily seemed impossible to continue in a lockdown situation. It was soon realized that dancers had initiated performance on virtual platform without much hesitation. This act itself was an act of utsaha, that is energy and enthusiasm, and hence inference could be drawn that participants were working during the pandemic, they were active. It was unusual in Indian dance history for a dance institution to conduct a virtual dance festival through live streaming to celebrate International Dance Day. This was due to the compelling situations of lockdown and pandemic. The title, very apt for the situation, suggested peace benediction for the universal welfare. This implied the Shantarasa, that is peace and serenity. Dance videos were exclusively created during the lockdown. Dancers created and shared dance videos. Through this activity, they brought various dimensions of content, creativity, and contribution to the world outside. It was noticed that they responded to their inner instincts along with reciprocating the external forces through their videos. Online teaching, conducting workshops and riyas, that is practice. Indian classical dance believes in personalized training system known as Guru Shishya Parampara, that is mentor-pupil relationship. Due to pandemic, participants migrated to online teaching modules and virtual dance workshops. It was mentioned, though, that such method of training could not be considered as a replacement to the personalized training method, but just a way of continuing of teaching and learning during such odd hours. Online sessions for riyas, that is practice, were thoughtfully organized by participants to instill the feeling of togetherness and assurance amongst their students. Such an act would fall under the category of valor as per the Rasa theory of Bharata, hence underlines hope and positivity. The last section was undertaking of different activities. The subsection in this category was posts related to generating funds or creating awareness. Participants proactively shared posts from different sources regarding creating support for dancers, bringing awareness regarding different socio-economical and political implications of the pandemic, with the dance fraternity to keep them prepared for a normal new situation. Engaging in such an act of support and welfare of the community is an act of courage and sympathy as per the Rasa theory. Therefore, it leads towards positive future. The next subsection, unique initiatives undertaken during the lockdown period. Dancers undertook creative and educative initiatives to engage the fraternity and to deviate them from the stress of the pandemic. One such initiative included organization of a virtual talk series focusing on the needs of contemporary dance field like dancers and social media, economics and dance, fitness and dance, and so on. Another initiative included Love for Footwork. The series allowed dancers to engage with the technical, rhythmic aspect of Indian classical dance. According to Rasa theory, such act of zeal will be underlined as an act of valor and hence creating hope. Physical fitness posts were comparatively less. We can think that it was probably because of lack of motivation or lack of availability of enough space required for maintaining fitness. The last section of this particular category was based on discussions on socio-economic aspects, life, and dance during the pandemic. This section was one of the most vibrant sections of the study. It reflected the inner aspects of the dancers through various questions they raised, thoughts they shared, techniques they discussed, and hope they shared with the community around. Traditions, values, compositions, choreography, dance techniques, creative decisions, collaborative work, music and composers, dance history, art during crisis, domestic violence, child labor, cosmic well-being, healing, Mother Earth, Mother Nature were some of the topics discussed with zeal and concern. The range of topics further included practice and improvisation, advanced methods of teaching online, free art made available online, being responsible citizens, questioning the government on key issues, and intolerant neighbors for discussion by dancers during this period. Limitations of the present study. It was based on urban or semi-urban perspective, represented only dancers, participants who were active on social media and therefore lacks perspective of those who were not active on social media. Conclusion. Dancers showed hope and positivity. They demonstrated strength, valor, peace, sympathy, courage, and humor by overcoming thoughts of fear, anger, sarcasm, and distress. Like the global community, Indian classical dancers were forced to social distancing and homebound activities, yet the present research unfolds the picture of concern and creativity, sustenance and support, entertainment and enlightenment, strength and adaptability, hope and positivity. Digital technology served as an important tool to connect to the world outside as well as an alternate space for work. The global audience was welcomed to the personal space of dancers. Concepts like physically isolated but united, quarantine jati, a new normal were unique to the COVID-19 situation. Adapting to online transition by classical Indian dancers not only helped to resume the disrupted connection with their work and the world outside, but also gave a new direction to Indian dance history. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So do we have any questions, Priya, in the Zoom or on Slido? Again, #pandemic. You can ask whatever you want. Just raise your hand in the Zoom call. If not, I would again like to, as a moderator, ask you, while studying your topic, again, thank you for your paper. Do you think that such behavior as your research showed was unique only for dancers, or could you find some parallels with other kinds of artists as well in your country or maybe internationally as well?
I actually honestly didn't get time to look for artists from other fields in my country, but yes, I'm aware that in the field of music, many of our colleagues were busy organizing or the actors were they were engaged in different creative endeavors, but also regarding dance outside India. I was aware that in different parts of the world, there were different collaborative talks and performances were taking place in the US and also in the Europe. And very interesting conversations were taking place regarding generating support for freelance dancers. Since the world was shut, since performances were cancelled, many of the freelance artists, dancers were affected badly. And so I kept coming across a lot of information relating to different areas around dancers' well-being.
Thank you. And do you think that this lockdown and the fact that dancers were able to work online and, for example, start really these online sessions, which was very much important for globalization of the dance community, I would say, because many people who are not able to, for example, come to India or the US to take some classes were able to do it online. Do you think, or what kind of implications and changes on the dance community globally, maybe, but also in your country, do you expect to happen?
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting topic, and there are many dimensions to it. I will just try to answer your question very quickly. That we grew up in a kind of system that is the Guru Shishya Parampara, that is in the learning in the presence of the Guru, directly in person learning Indian classical dance. And it is not only you understand the technique, but you also grasp a lot of elements from the person that you're learning from. And there were times that they were very strict and they were very, very minimalistic in giving their guidance, making us think a lot in different directions. Slowly I started seeing that we used to take notes, but slowly I started seeing that now students take video of, even if we are in the in-person class, students take videos and they watch the videos and they learn and they come up. So I don't want to compare as such. I just feel that as long as everybody is feeling that aspect of growth and learning, and they're able to express, it should satisfy the need. But I think it is going to change, and many have adapted to this new mode of operating in last 2 months, like anything. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, do we have other questions as well? If not, I would like to ask all of the participants to turn on their cameras again.
You gotta turn the camera on, right? I want to see the rest.
How do we do? Yeah, I can't do that. I don't know what's happening. Start my video.
Can you? Yes, great. Okay, do we have questions for anyone from this panel? Because if not, I have one question actually on Slido for Ms. Kelemen. How does the threat of future pandemic or similar issues going to affect the thinking about security in terms of policy?
Okay, good question. So I think that we are seeing, let's say, 2 different levels in terms of security and policy. First is going to be public spaces regarding, let's say, companies. So companies will have to think about how to provide security for their employees, how to manage kind of, this threat of virus. But maybe what's more interesting, it's the international level. So we have seen that countries are quite exposed when it comes to their supply chains. So probably countries will start thinking about, the necessary equipment you need for the pandemics. And this is probably going to drive also a lot of changes when it comes to international relations between countries. You know, countries will have to focus on global health security policy. So already a lot of pressure on China to be more transparent, but also how to cooperate. And regarding this, there's going to be probably more harmonization between EU countries. So not only on security level, but similarly to, let's say, counterterrorism information sharing. So I think those are going to be some major changes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We don't have further questions. Again, I would like to thank all of the panelists, Priya Joshi, Barbara Kelemen, Peter Mantello, and Douglas Ponton. Thank you all for watching on live stream.